I'm pleased to present some information today on NEH's Digital Humanities Advancement Grants Program. This webinar will cover both deadline dates for the 2025 cycle. I'm structuring this session around where you can find the information you need to determine if DHAG is the right fit for your work, and if so, how to write a strong application. Therefore, I plan to first cover information available on the DHAG program resource page, then turn to the Notice of Funding opportunity, and I'll end with some tips and reminders for planning and writing your application. So here we are looking at the program resource page or the landing page for DHAG, where we give a high-level overview of the program. The first paragraph explains that the overarching goal of this program is to support work that is innovative, experimental, and contributes to the critical infrastructure that underpins scholarly research, teaching, and public programming in the humanities. This focus on innovation and experimentation is really central. If your project is using established tools and methods, it is likely a better fit for another grant program. The word infrastructure here is really important as well. We are seeking to fund activities that are not just single institution projects, but rather ones that contribute more broadly to the humanities by developing hardware, software, code, and resources that can be used and adapted by others, ideally including those outside your own institution or organization. In the second paragraph, we note that DHAG is one of many grant programs at NEH that can support digital humanities. We include a link to a set of resources intended to help you find the best fit for your digital projects. And we also encourage you to reach out to us if there's any uncertainty about the fit of your project to this particular grant program. So if you click that link, you arrive at this website with a list of several resources. NEH has programs that are designed, among other things, to allow applicants to digitize collections to make them more accessible, to build websites or VR exhibits to share important humanities information with the public, or to create born digital publications based on scholarly research. We encourage you to use these resources to discover the many grant programs we offer. Returning to the program resource page and scrolling down, you'll see that we have sections titled What's New for 2025 and Reminders. In the What's New section, we alert you that the second deadline is now in May. It was previously in June. That we have reworked and updated the funding restrictions section, so we're advising applicants to pay careful attention to that. That we have streamlined the program's review criteria, and then that awards made at the May deadline will be subject to NEH's public access policy. So if you plan to apply in May, this is something you'll want to pay attention to. I'll say more about that later in talking about data management and sharing plans. In the reminders section, we have some information intended to ensure your application is eligible. In short, we note that applications will be declared ineligible for review if they do not comply with all requirements indicated with a must outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity or NOFO, that two or more applications for federal funding are not permitted to include overlapping project costs, and that letters of support are not allowed. I'll now turn to the NOFO. So this can be a little tricky to find, so I'll show you how to navigate to it. From our program resource page, you'll want to click Application Instructions, both at the top or the bottom of the page, and then you actually have to expand a menu so that you'll click on Step 1, Review Your Application Package to expand that menu and see the options below. This is also where you can find our FAQ, list of recent awards, and sample application narratives. I'll say more about these resources in the tips and reminders section. The executive summary section of the NOFO has a lot of important information, including deadlines, dates we anticipate announcing awards, how much you're allowed to request at the three different funding levels, how long your grant period can be, and who can apply. With respect to eligibility, only organizations and not individuals are eligible to apply to this program. Applicant institutions must be in the United States or one of its jurisdictions and must fit into one of the four categories shown here. So before I dive more deeply into the NOFO, I'll remind you that my goals here are really to help you determine if this is the best fit for your work and also how to parse the document to prepare a strong application. The current version of the DHAG NOFO is over 40 pages long, about 10 to 12 pages of which are instructions on completing various forms, including the budget. Because those are quite detailed and thorough, I will not be talking about those, but of course, those are, preparing the budget is very important as well. Um, So looking first at section A, the program description, this is where we explain the purpose of the grant program here. This language essentially matches what we have on the landing page. There are two sections of all NEH NOFOs that do not appear until nearly the end of the document. So we're flagging those up in this third paragraph because otherwise they're easy to overlook. The first is a list of funding restrictions where you can see what sorts of activities are not allowed in this grant program. And the second is a list of related funding opportunities. I'll navigate quickly to both of those sections of the NOFO now. Under funding restrictions, you can see that projects focused primarily on activities in this list may be judged non-responsive and therefore ineligible unless you propose an innovative or experimental for carrying out the activities. And we do leave that up to applicants to make a case for how the work is innovative or experimental. We recognize that that's often a shifting mark. So some of the entries here include digitizing collections or documents, aggregating or linking collections and data, creating databases of digitized sources, and developing open educational resources. Many of these restrictions are in place because NEH has other grant programs to support these activities. Therefore, the related funding opportunities section outlines several of these programs, and it also links back to some of those resources I shared earlier. Returning to the program description section of the NOFO, we next outline differences between the funding levels. We offer three funding levels designed to give you some flexibility based on the scope, maturity, and needs of your project. Level 1 is appropriate for smaller projects or those at earlier stages of a larger project, where you might use funding to bring people together to scope out a research agenda or map out the next steps for your project. Level 1 funding can also be used to develop experimental alpha level prototypes. These projects can be up to $75,000 and 2 years in duration. Level 2 is for projects that have completed an initial planning phase. They need not have received a prior Level 1 award, and they're poised to scale up based on prior research and development. They should include plans for extending work beyond the applicant institution. These projects can range between $75,000 and $150,000, and they also have periods of performance of up to 2 years. Finally, level 3 projects. This funding is to allow the scaling up and expansion of more mature projects with established user bases. Successful level 3 projects will have robust dissemination plans beyond the applicant institution and include a formal sustainability plan. Applicants at the level 3 stage can request between $150,000 and $350,000 and may request an additional $100,000 in federal matching funds to leverage external funding. The period of performance for level 3 is up to 3 years. The next section identifies some of the types of outputs we might expect at different funding levels, including some that are appropriate at all levels. In the background section of the NOFO, we have some language from our founding legislation, the National Foundation for the Arts and Humanities Act of 1965, that includes a definition of the humanities. We have some language about our partnership with the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And then we have several paragraphs about NEH areas of interest. So our current areas of interest that are relevant to DHAG include American Tapestry, United We Stand, and the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. If your project aligns with one or more of these areas, it is helpful to include that in your narrative. So if you're following along in the NOFO, I've already covered much of the information that appears in sections B and C. So I'm now skipping ahead to section D, application and submission information, where I'll draw your attention to the application component table. This table is really useful. It tells you whether a particular section of your application is required, recommended, or conditionally required, and it also specifies any page or paragraph limits. The required sections for all DHAG applications include a list of personnel, a narrative, and you can see that the page limit varies by funding level, a work plan, one paragraph biographies for each of the key personnel on the project team, a data management and sharing plan, and then several forms, including the research and related budget and budget justification. A requirement specific to level 3 projects is a sustainability plan, where you will discuss the long-term technical, personnel, and financial needs of your project, and also how you plan to sustain the project after the period of performance. There are a few conditionally required items. One that I'll flag concerns subawards. So if your project includes one or more subawards, you'll need to include a budget form and budget justification for any subrecipient institutions. Recommended sections include appendices and letters of commitment. In the appendices, you might opt to include bibliographies or works cited, startup phase materials such as planning documents, agendas, and participant lists for workshops and meetings, use cases or scenarios, wireframes or annotated screenshots, and user experience results from earlier stages of the project. So it's a good chance to show what you've learned and how your project is building on past knowledge. If your project involves personnel outside your institution, we strongly recommend you include letters of commitment from those individuals. Letters of commitment should not discuss the project's value or potential impact because those will be considered letters of support. There are 6 required sections that make up the narrative. These are a 1-paragraph overview of the project, the Enhancing the Humanities section, an environmental scan, a section discussing the history of the project, one outlining the activities and project team, and finally, final products and dissemination. Under each header in the NOFO, we provide a thorough description of what information should go in each section. The next part of the NOFO talks you through what information is needed for each of the attachments you'll prepare in addition to the narrative. So this includes the work plan, biographies, data management and sharing plan, sustainability plan for level 3 projects, appendices, and letters. So we advise you to pay close attention to page and section limits and any special instructions to ensure your project isn't declared ineligible. For example, under the work plan, we say the work plan must not exceed 3 pages. Under biographies, we include language to not include CVs or resumes. For the data management and sharing plan, we have language that if you include, we have language about this not exceeding 2 pages. And then under sustainability plan, we have language that if you include one for a level 1 or 2 application, we will remove it. So the rest of the attachments are shown here. And with appendices, we strongly recommend that you not exceed 10 pages peer reviewers tend to get a little cranky when they're asked to look at really, really long um, applications with long appendices. And then we also have language about letters of support. While letters of support are standard for many grant programs, we will actually remove these as we want peer reviewers to review each application on its own merits to the extent possible. So we do want to see letters of commitment from outside personnel, but not letters of support. Going back quickly to attachment 5, ODH has long required data management plans for our project. Starting this year, we will now require a data management and sharing plan as NEH is developing a policy to expand access to our award products. You can read, so this is the data management and sharing plan. Um, you can read more about this policy on our public access plan website. In short, we are now asking you to not only consider how you will manage data generated through your NEH funded work, but how you will share it and make it accessible to others. The application component section provides instructions on completing the required or conditionally required grants.gov forms, including the research and related budget form. And then section 3 outlines how to register for login.gov, the system for award management, and grants.gov. If your organization has not registered already, you will want to do so well in advance of the application deadline, since this can take some time. Section 4 has information on submitting an inquiry or draft for review by ODH staff, which I'll say more about shortly, and also application deadlines. After the funding restrictions section, which we already looked at, you can see the review criteria that peer reviewers will use in evaluating applications submitted to this program. The first 5 will be used for all applications. These are followed by additional review criteria to be used for level 3 projects. The review criteria do not appear until page 31 of the NOFO, but please be sure to not overlook these. I'll talk a little bit more about how to use these in the tips and reminders section. The final section of the NOFO I'll touch on is one that provides information on NEH's review and selection process, assessment of risk, and anticipated award or anticipated announcement and award dates. Um, the review process does take quite a long time. It takes several months. After we receive applications, staff have a look at them and review them to ensure that they are eligible. We then assign eligible applications to panels and assemble typically a 5-member peer review panel. After panels meet, NEH staff identify which proposals to recommend for funding based on peer review input and the amount of money available. All of the recommended applications across NEH then go to the NEH National Council on the Humanities, which meets 3 times a year, typically in March, July, and November. After that council meeting, the NEH chair makes final funding decisions. We expect that applicants to the January deadline for DHAG will be notified in August, and applicants at the May deadline will be notified in December. So at this point, I'm going to cover a few general tips and reminders. The first one is to start early. We always encourage potential applicants to start the process earlier than you think you need to. This is so that you can carefully review your work, ask questions, and ensure that you and your institutional grants administrator have enough time to complete all of the registrations and forms in addition to writing the application. So if you've not used grants.gov previously, you will need to ensure that you have created registrations and passwords for both grants.gov and sam.gov. And if you have used it before, we advise you to make sure that your registrations are up to date and that you can log in. Use the NOFO and other resources. So be sure to review the entire NOFO before you submit your application, and pay careful attention to any musts and page and section limits, as well as funding restrictions, to make sure your application will not be judged ineligible. We also have an FAQ, a list of recent awards, and sample application narratives on the program resource page. In addition to that, NEH has a database of funded projects that might be helpful to get a sense of what we funded in the past, and especially in preparing your environmental scan. So this shows where you can find the FAQ, list of recent awards, and sample application narratives. Again, these are just under the link to the NOFO. And here is what the NEH award search page looks like. You can search by program, organization name or type, fields of project, keywords, etc. Be clear and concise. You'll want to be sure that someone not familiar with your project can figure out what it is you want to do really quickly. So use that one paragraph overview of the project section to give a high level description of your project and explain why it is important. You'll want to avoid jargon and overly technical language. We really suggest that applicants write for a fairly broad audience, given that the peer review panel is likely composed of some humanities scholars, possibly in your field, possibly not, as well as computer and information scientists, perhaps data scientists, librarians, archivists, and other humanities professionals. So we have very diverse panels. It's a really good idea to have colleagues outside your own discipline provide feedback before you submit to NEH. Review your work. So the various sections of your application should all be aligned and all tell the same story. If reviewers get to the budget and they discover an entry for a workshop or a software developer that has not been discussed anywhere in the narrative, or vice versa, this will likely raise questions. Similarly, if the success of your project depends on having a team member with certain expertise and that person isn't named in the list of personnel or their bio does not accurately describe their skills, reviewers may have questions as to whether the project team is well positioned to complete the proposed activities. Make sure your project is addressing all of the review criteria. So read through those and ensure that a reviewer is able to respond to each of them based on the information you're providing in your application. Finally, reach out to ODH staff to ask us questions, to submit an inquiry, or to submit a draft. We have long accepted draft applications where we can provide feedback and comments. Please bear in mind that these have no formal bearing on the review process and are not binding. So even if we tell you your project is not a strong fit, you're still welcome to apply. If you are planning to apply for the January deadline, drafts will be due on November 13. And for the May deadline, the deadline date for drafts is March 24. It can take us several weeks to reply to drafts because once we hit that deadline date, we have quite a few to work through. So if you mainly have questions about the fit of your project, you might want instead to send us an email with a short project description, perhaps no more than 2 pages. And we can reply to those inquiries much more quickly and hopefully save you some time. We also can ask any questions you might have as you're finishing up your applications and point you to colleagues at NEH. With that, I will thank you all for watching and encourage you to reach out with any questions.